Well, President Putin has put the brakes on what could have been a deepening diplomatic row with the US, which is expelling diplomats and slamming new sanctions over claims of hacking the US election. The Russian leader says it's not the time for such unfriendly retaliatory actions, even though such a response would have been warranted.
We reserve the right for tit-for-tat measures, but we won't stoop to kitchen diplomacy. We'll plan our next steps to restore Russian-US relations based on policy which the new administration of Donald Trump will pursue. We won't create hurdles for American diplomats. We won't expel anyone.
Well, let's go live to RT's Emily Sue to get the latest reaction. Obviously, Russian officials understandably aggrieved at what's gone on, but allegedly there will be no response, Emily, is that right?
Yes, absolutely, Dan. And in Putin's statement in response to these latest U.S. sanctions, he has described them as provocative and that it undermines U.S. and Russian relations, adding that it is harmful to the entire system of international relations. But despite all that, Putin has confirmed that Russia will not be expelling any of the American diplomats working in Russia, contrary to what Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, has suggested earlier. Now, in that statement we just aired just now, it's also an obvious hint that Putin is saying that he will be dealing with Donald Trump, the incoming U.S. president. And despite that he's regrettable that Obama chose to end his administration in this way, Putin congratulated Obama and also wished him a happy new year. And before all these latest developments, some media outlets have been allegedly spreading false information. Before the Russian government specified on any of the possible measures they will be implementing to counter these sanctions, CNN has cited an unnamed American official saying that Moscow has already closed down an Anglo-American school for kids of diplomats working here in Russia. Take a listen to their report.
Russia now vowing to issue its own response to U.S. sanctions and has already ordered the American School of Moscow to close.
That is a lie, and there is no need to say that Moscow denied or Moscow will not. Just say it how it is. CNN and other Western media outlets basing their reporting on official U.S. government sources have spread false information.
Well, despite this diplomatic spat and growing tensions between the U.S. and Russia, Putin, in his statement, said that Russia will not spoil the holidays for anyone. And on a brighter note, has invited all the children of the American diplomats to join in one of the important cultural tradition of coming under one of the city's biggest Christmas trees in the Kremlin to ring in the New Year and to join the New Year celebrations. And I'll be monitoring all the latest reaction from the Russian government here in central Moscow. Dan.
Thanks for that, Emily. RT's Emily Sue bring us the latest on that latest diplomatic scandal. Well, President Obama's raft of expulsions and sanctions are being seen as a last swipe at Russia in his final weeks of power. Well, let's take a look at what's actually happened. The 35 Russian diplomats and also their families have been given 72 hours to leave the United States. Alleged harassment of American staff overseas was cited as the reason for that decision. It's one of the largest expulsions of diplomats from the United States. Also, 2 Russian compounds allegedly used for intelligence purposes in New York and Maryland are also being shut down. Now, the sanctions also target Russia's 2 main intelligence agencies. Let's take a look. 4 top intelligence officials have been blacklisted by the United States. On top of all that, there are measures against 3 companies that supposedly supported Russian cyber operations against the Democratic Party. Well, the new sanctions were unveiled after the release of a joint FBI and Homeland Security report. With more details, here's Caleb Maupin.
This report, it goes into detail, describes a lot of software and computer technology, but it never explains what proof that they have that all of this stuff is linked to Russia. There's no real proof or evidence that the tools they're describing or the technology they're describing is being used by people associated with Russia or the Russian government. Now, Obama is set to leave office very soon. He will be leaving the White House, and on January 20th, Donald Trump will be sworn in as the new president of the United States. People are speculating that it's not going to be a very smooth transition, as they clearly have very different assessments of why the U.S. presidential election ended up the way it did.
However, the joint report put together by the Department of National Security and the FBI contains a disclaimer. It says the information in the document cannot be confirmed and is only for informational purposes. The commentators we spoke to say the report uses technical terms to mask the fact that it lacks evidence.
There are so many qualifiers in this report. There is even a disclaimer at the beginning of the report saying, this may or may not be true. They certainly didn't go no further in establishing how these two hacking groups, if they were indeed responsible for the hacks, how they were tied to the Russian government whatsoever. They simply cited some private security companies that have made these claims. Well, I'm sorry, we spend $80 billion a year on U.S. intelligence capabilities. Certainly they can do better than this. We've all been through the Just Trust Us on WMDs in Iraq, and frankly, most Americans, I don't think, are ready to believe Just Trust Us again.
They're just covering their backs, aren't they? They know it's a bunch of rubbish. I mean, the fact that they're not actually standing by, they're not warranting the report they put out today, the Department of Homeland Security, rather points to the fact that it is pure propaganda, and they know it. There's a lot of information in there about, the technological spec, that sort of thing. They're trying to blind people with science, but there's no real evidence.
Well, the lack of specifics in the report has spurned a fair bit of online mockery. This prominent cybersecurity expert tweeted the list of valuable information from the report. Well, despite having pretty slim evidence to go on, reports of supposed Russian hacking have been circulating in the Western media now for several months.
We are also following new details on the Russians' motives for hacking and meddling in the U.S. presidential election.
Hacking and leaking that the administration says the Russians carried out.
The CIA has concluded Russian hackers intervened in the U.S. election.
The fact that they did not focus on this issue to the extent that we thought they would and they should is something that I think the press needs to do some introspection about.
Do you believe Vladimir Putin himself authorized the hack, and do you believe he authorized that to help Donald Trump?
I give the intelligence community the chance to gather all the information, but I'd make a larger point, which is not much happens in Russia without Vladimir Putin.
Do you feel any obligation now, as they've been insisting that this isn't the case, to show the proof, as it were? They say put your money where your mouth is and declassify some of the intelligence, some of the evidence that exists.
We will provide evidence that we can safely provide.
Does the DOD or NSA or any U.S. agency for that matter have any evidence that the Russians, either their agents, operatives, or government, that they hacked into the emails of the Democratic National Committee?
What proof does anyone have that they affected the outcome? Because I've heard zero. Okay? So show me what facts have actually shown that anything undermined that election.
So the CIA says that Russia did, in fact, attempt to sway the U.S. presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. What most media isn't doing is actually asking for evidence of these claims.
Some electors, mostly Democrats, are questioning Russia's role in the presidential election.
What I want is the information to be out there so that the American public and electors know who has been involved.